They say the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, like a rotten fish floating up from the bottom of a murky pond, stinking up everything around it. Well, let me tell you about the best week of my life. The week I discovered my wife Sophie was a lying, scheming piece of work who thought I was too stupid to notice. My name is Eddie Carver, and I run a mid-sized construction company here in Millbrook, Maine. Nothing fancy, but honest work that pays the bills and keeps food on the table. Or at least it did, until Sophie decided she needed more excitement in her life than what a blue-collar guy like me could provide. It started on a Tuesday morning in October. I was nursing a hangover from celebrating what I thought was our upcoming wedding, just 3 weeks away, when Sophie came into the kitchen looking like she'd been crying all night. Her mascara was smudged, and she had that practiced look of devastation that I'd seen her use on difficult clients at her PR firm. "Eddie, honey, I have terrible news," she said, her voice trembling just right. "Blaine called last night. He's been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer." Blaine Harrow, her ex-boyfriend from college, the trust fund prince who drove a BMW and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I'd heard his name exactly 3 times in our 2 years together, always in passing, always with a dismissive wave of her hand like he was ancient history. "That's awful," I said, because what else do you say? "I'm sorry to hear that." Sophie dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "He doesn't have anyone else, Eddie. His parents are in Europe, and he's all alone. I think we need to postpone the wedding." The coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. "Postpone?" "Just for a few weeks, maybe a month. He needs someone to drive him to treatments, to be there for moral support. You understand, don't you? It's the right thing to do." I stared at her across our granite kitchen counter, the one I'd installed myself last spring, working evenings and weekends to surprise her. The morning light streaming through the windows made her look almost angelic, all golden hair and concerned blue eyes. Any decent human being would have felt sympathy for her plight. Instead, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Of course," I heard myself saying. "Family emergency. I get it." She smiled then, that brilliant PR smile that could sell ice to Eskimos. "You're wonderful, Eddie. This is why I love you so much." Love. Right. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I went to the construction site, barked orders at my crew, and tried to focus on the foundation we were pouring for a new office building downtown. But my mind kept circling back to Sophie's performance that morning. Because that's what it had been, a performance. I'd seen her practice presentations in the mirror, perfecting every gesture and inflection. This morning's breakdown had the same rehearsed quality. That night, I pretended to be asleep when her phone buzzed at 2 a.m. She slipped out of bed and padded to the bathroom, whispering urgently to someone on the other end. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught the tone. Intimate, conspiratorial. Nothing like the worried friend she'd claimed to be. When she came back to bed, I waited exactly 10 minutes before getting up myself. Her phone was charging on the kitchen counter, and the recent calls list showed 3 entries to Millbrook General Hospital between midnight and 2 a.m. Funny thing about hospitals, they don't usually call patients at midnight unless it's an emergency, and they certainly don't make patients giggle like schoolgirls. Wednesday morning, I called Millbrook General and asked to speak with someone about visiting hours for cancer patients. The receptionist was helpful. Too helpful, in fact. She cheerfully informed me that they didn't have a cancer ward. Patients needing oncology treatment were sent to Portland General, about an hour south. I hung up and stared at Sophie's phone number written on my palm in blue ink. 3 calls to a hospital that didn't even treat cancer patients. 3 calls that had made my wife of 2 years postpone our wedding to care for her supposedly terminal ex-boyfriend. The pieces started falling into place with the subtle click of a well-oiled trap snapping shut. Thursday, I decided to test my theory. I came home early from the job site, making sure to park around the corner and walk the last 2 blocks. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house, and Mrs. Bowles, our 80-year-old neighbor, was always stationed at her front window like a sentry. "Afternoon, Mrs. Bowles," I called up to her. "Eddie, dear, home early today?" Thought I'd surprise Sophie. She's been so stressed about her friend's illness. Mrs. Bowles's wrinkled face scrunched up in confusion. Friend's illness? But she seemed perfectly happy this morning when she left with that handsome man in the fancy car. My heart started hammering, but I kept my voice casual. "Oh, that must have been Blaine. He's the one who's sick." "Sick?" Heavens, he looked healthy as a horse to me. Quite the specimen, actually. They were laughing about something when they drove off. I thanked Mrs. Bowles and climbed the stairs to our apartment, each step feeling like I was walking through quicksand. The key turned in the lock with a soft click, and I pushed the door open to find Sophie sitting at our kitchen table, her laptop open, phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Not the forced, brittle laugh she used at work functions or family dinners. This was genuine, bubbling up from somewhere deep and joyful. The kind of laugh she used to give me back when we first started dating. Can't believe he actually bought it, she was saying. The whole crying routine, the postponed wedding, everything. He's so trusting, it's almost sad. I stood frozen in the doorway, my work boots still muddy from the construction site, watching my fiancée mock me to her lover. No, he won't suspect anything. Eddie's sweet, but he's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. Blue-collar guys like him don't think past their next paycheck. That's when I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small velvet box containing her wedding ring and the matching band I'd planned to wear, and set them gently on the kitchen counter. The soft thud made Sophie turn around. Her face went through a fascinating series of expressions: surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally a mask of wounded innocence that would have been impressive if I hadn't just heard her real thoughts. "Eddie, you're home early. I was just talking to the hospital," I finished. "About Blaine's cancer treatments." "Yeah, I heard." She closed the laptop with a sharp snap. "It's not what you think." "Really? Because what I think is that you're postponing our wedding to shack up with your ex-boyfriend and you figured I'd be too stupid to notice." "That's not..." "The hospital you've been calling doesn't have a cancer ward, Sophie. Took me exactly one phone call to figure that out. Guess I'm not as dumb as you thought." For a moment, we stared at each other across the kitchen that had been the heart of our home for 2 years. She looked smaller somehow, deflated, like a balloon with a slow leak. "I can explain," she said finally. "I'm sure you can. You're good with words. It's your job. But I'm not interested in hearing your explanation." I picked up the ring box and slipped it back into my pocket. "Consider this your notice. I'll be staying at Toby's for a while. You can figure out what you want to tell people about the wedding." "Eddie, please, let's talk about this like adults." I almost laughed. Adults. Like she'd been acting like an adult when she was planning to humiliate me in front of our families and friends. "You know what, Sophie? You're right. We should handle this like adults. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to pack your things and get out of my apartment. You're going to call the vendors and cancel the wedding arrangements, and you're going to explain to your parents why their little princess isn't getting married next month. This is my home, too. Check the lease. It's in my name, just like the furniture, the dishes, and that granite countertop you love so much." I turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Sophie? If you plan to cheat on someone again, maybe don't do it with a guy who claims to have cancer. It's a little too easy to verify." The sound of her calling my name followed me down the stairs and out into the October afternoon. Mrs. Bowles was still at her window, and she gave me a little wave as I passed. I waved back, wondering how long she'd known what was going on and had been waiting for me to figure it out. My truck was parked around the corner, and I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, engine running, trying to process what had just happened. 2 years of my life, gone. Wedding plans, shared dreams, the future I'd been building in my head, all of it built on lies. But here's the thing about construction work. It teaches you that before you can build something new, you have to clear away the old foundation. And sometimes that means taking a sledgehammer to things you thought were solid. I pulled out my phone and dialed Toby Martinez, my foreman and the closest thing I had to a best friend. "Eddie, what's up, boss?" "You still got that spare room available?" "Course. What's going on?" "Sophie and I are done. I'll explain later. Right now, I need a drink and a place to crash. Meet me at Murphy's in 20 minutes. First round's on me." Murphy's Tavern was the kind of place where construction workers, mechanics, and other honest folks went to wash the taste of a hard day out of their mouths. Dark wood, dim lights, and a bartender who minded his own business. Perfect for drowning sorrows or plotting revenge. I chose revenge. Toby was already nursing a beer when I walked into Murphy's, still wearing my work clothes and probably looking like I'd been hit by a cement mixer. He took one look at my face and ordered me a double whiskey without asking what I wanted. "So," he said, sliding the glass across the scarred wooden table. "Want to tell me what happened, or should I guess?" I knocked back half the whiskey and felt it burn all the way down. Sophie's been cheating on me with her ex-boyfriend. They postponed our wedding so she could take care of him during his cancer treatments. Cancer? He doesn't have cancer. That was just their cover story. Toby whistled low. "Damn, Eddie. That's cold, even for a PR person." "Gets better. I heard her on the phone laughing about how stupid I am. How blue-collar guys like me don't think past our next paycheck. She said that? Word for word. Toby's face darkened. He was built like a fire hydrant, short, solid, and impossible to move when he planted his feet. Right now, he looked like he wanted to plant his fist in someone's face. You want me to have a talk with this boyfriend? Blaine Harrow. And no, I don't want you to talk to him. I want something better than that. What do you mean? I finished the whiskey and set the glass down with a soft click. I mean, I want them to pay for this. Really pay. Not just a beating they'll recover from in a few weeks. I want them to hurt the way they hurt me. Eddie. They think I'm stupid, Toby. They think I'm just some dumb construction worker who'll slink away with his tail between his legs. But they're wrong. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken of Sophie's laptop screen while she was in the shower that morning. Email threads with subject lines like weekend plans and E doesn't suspect anything and can't wait to be done with this charade. Jesus, Toby muttered, scrolling through the screenshots. She really thought you'd never figure it out. And that's the thing about people like Sophie and Blaine. They think they're so much smarter than everyone else that they get careless. They make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? I smiled, and it probably wasn't a nice smile. The kind that let you destroy their lives without breaking any laws. Over the next hour, I laid out what I'd learned. Blaine Harrow was old money, or at least he played one on social media. His family had a trust fund, but from what I could gather from Sophie's emails, Blaine himself was living beyond his means. The BMW was leased, the fancy condo was rented, and he was constantly borrowing money from friends and family to maintain his lifestyle. Sophie, meanwhile, had been using our joint savings account to fund their little romantic getaways. Weekend trips to Portland, expensive dinners, hotel rooms, all charged to the credit card that I paid off every month like a dutiful fiancé. So they're both frauds, Toby said. Worse than that, they're frauds who think they're untouchable. What are you going to do? I ordered another whiskey and leaned back in my chair. The plan was already forming in my head, pieces clicking together like a blueprint coming to life. First, I'm going to let them think they won. Sophie will move in with Blaine, they'll have their little love nest, and they'll congratulate themselves on how cleverly they handled the dumb construction worker. And then? Then I'm going to show them what happens when you underestimate someone who builds things for a living. Because the thing about construction work, Toby, is that you learn how to tear things down just as well as you learn how to build them up. The next morning, I drove back to the apartment to collect some of my things. Sophie's car was gone, probably spending the day with her new boyfriend, but she'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Eddie, it read in her precise handwriting, I'm sorry things ended this way. I never meant to hurt you. I hope someday you can forgive me and we can be friends again. I'll be staying with Elena for a while until I can find my own place. Take care of yourself. Love, Sophie. Love, Sophie. Right. Elena was Sophie's best friend and partner in crime, a socialite who spent her days shopping and gossiping and her evenings at charity functions where she could see and be seen. If Sophie was staying with her, it meant she was still trying to maintain her image as the wronged party in our breakup. That gave me an idea. I spent the rest of the morning packing my clothes and personal items, but I also did something else. I installed a small digital recorder behind the bookshelf in the living room, the kind contractors use to document conversations with difficult clients. If Sophie was going to bring Blaine to our apartment, I wanted to hear what they said when they thought they were alone. Then I drove to the office supply store and bought a cheap laptop, paying cash. When I got back to Toby's place, I set up a new email account under the name Concerned Citizen 2023 and started doing research. Blaine Harrow had a surprisingly large digital footprint for someone who supposedly valued privacy. Social media accounts, charity board memberships, mentions in society page articles about fundraising galas and golf tournaments. He presented himself as a philanthropist and community leader, but the deeper I dug, the more I found evidence of financial problems. A lawsuit from a former business partner, liens on property, credit reports that painted a picture of someone living paycheck to paycheck despite the expensive facade. But the most interesting thing I found was a pattern of charitable involvement that seemed more about networking than genuine concern for causes. Blaine served on the boards of 3 different nonprofits, all of which seemed to have very loose oversight and accounting practices. That's when I had my second idea. It took me 3 days to set up the website. Nothing fancy, just a simple page with a donation button and a compelling story about a young man facing cancer without insurance or family support. I called it Cancer Care for Blaine and used photos I'd pulled from his social media accounts, along with a heartbreaking narrative about his brave fight against the disease. The beauty of it was that every word was technically true based on what Sophie had told me. Blaine Harrow was facing a health crisis. He needed community support, Donations would go directly to helping with his medical expenses. I just didn't mention that the health crisis was fictional and the medical expenses were non-existent. Then I did something that would have made Sophie proud of my technical skills. I hacked into her email account using the password she'd written on a sticky note attached to her laptop. The same laptop she'd left behind in her hurry to move in with her new boyfriend. I sent the link to the fundraising website to everyone in her contact list, along with a heartfelt message about how touched she was by the community's support during this difficult time. Her coworkers, college friends, family members, even her parents' country club acquaintances, everyone got a personal appeal to help Blaine in his time of need. The donations started trickling in within hours. $20 here, $50 there, nothing huge, but steady. And every donation came with a message of support that was forwarded to the email address I'd set up for the campaign. Thinking of you both during this difficult time. Blaine is lucky to have such a caring friend. Please let us know if there's anything else we can do to help. By the end of the week, the fund had raised almost $2,000, and Sophie's phone was probably buzzing nonstop with well-wishers asking about Blaine's treatment progress. That's when I made my first direct contact. I called Sophie's cell phone from a number she wouldn't recognize, a prepaid phone I'd bought with cash. Hello? Her voice was tense, stressed. Sophie, it's Eddie. Eddie, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Something weird is happening. What do you mean? People keep calling me about Blaine's cancer fund. They're saying I sent them a link to some website asking for donations, but I never sent anything like that. That's strange. Maybe someone's trying to help? But Eddie, Blaine doesn't have cancer. I made that up to... Well, you know why I made it up. So you're saying you lied to me about your ex-boyfriend being sick? A long pause. Yes, I'm sorry. I know how it sounds. It sounds like you postponed our wedding to cheat on me, Sophie. That's how it sounds. I deserve that. But Eddie, this website thing is serious. People are donating money for a fake illness. That's fraud. Sounds like a problem you and Blaine need to figure out together. You wouldn't what? Set up a fundraising website based on the story you told me. Why would I do that? Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Because you're angry with me. I am angry with you, Sophie, but I'm not a criminal. If someone set up a website using information you gave them, maybe you should think about why your lies are causing problems for other people. I hung up and smiled. The trap was set, and Sophie was starting to realize she was caught in it. But this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the donations kept coming, and the messages of support grew more elaborate. People shared stories of their own battles with cancer, offered to organize meal trains and transportation to treatments, even suggested setting up a benefit concert at the local community center. The more support the fake campaign received, the more frantic Sophie became. She called me 6 more times, each conversation more desperate than the last. Eddie, you have to help me shut this down. Eddie, people are starting to ask questions about why they haven't seen Blaine at the hospital. Eddie, my boss is asking if I need time off to care for him. Eddie, his parents called from Europe. They're flying back early because they heard he was seriously ill. That last one made me laugh out loud. Blaine's parents were cutting their extended European vacation short because the internet had convinced them their son was gravely sick. The lies were starting to snowball, gathering momentum and size as they rolled downhill toward the inevitable crash. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The 3rd week of my new life as a single man brought an unexpected visitor to the construction site. I was reviewing blueprints with Toby when my phone buzzed with a text from our security company. Motion detected at main gate. Through the chain-link fence, I could see a familiar BMW pulling into the visitor parking area. Blaine Harrow stepped out, looking every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit and Italian leather shoes. He moved with the confident stride of someone who'd never been told no, never been denied anything he wanted. Today, he wanted to talk to me. Boss, Toby said, following my gaze. Isn't that... yeah, that's him. Want me to handle it? I considered the offer. Toby had 20 years of construction experience and hands like sledgehammers. He could make Blaine disappear into the foundation we were pouring without anyone asking too many questions. But that would be too easy. And too illegal. No, I'll talk to him. But stay close, just in case. Blaine approached the gate with the kind of casual arrogance that came from a lifetime of privilege. Up close, he was exactly what I'd expected. Perfectly groomed, expensive cologne, the kind of tan that came from golf courses and yacht clubs rather than honest work. Eddie Carver? His voice had that practiced smoothness of someone who'd gone to the right schools and knew the right people. That's me. You must be Blaine. His smile faltered slightly. Sophie told you about me. She told me a lot of things. Most of them were lies, but she did mention your name. Look, I know this is awkward. Awkward? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Awkward is showing up late to a dinner party. What you and Sophie did goes a little beyond awkward. Blaine glanced around at the construction site, taking in the heavy machinery, the workers in hard hats, the general atmosphere of people who solve problems with tools rather than words. I came here to apologize, he said, and to ask you to stop the fundraising campaign. What fundraising campaign? Don't play dumb, Eddie. The Cancer Fund, Cancer Care for Blaine. We know you set it up. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search, pulling up the website I'd created. This thing? Wow. Looks like people really care about your health, Blaine. Almost $3,000 raised so far. I don't have cancer. I know that. Sophie told me she made up the story to postpone our wedding. Pretty clever, actually. Who's going to question someone caring for a sick friend? Blaine's jaw tightened. Then you know the donations are based on false information. Are they? Let me read the website description again. I scrolled through the text, reading aloud. A young man facing a serious health crisis needs our community's support. Blaine Harrow is fighting the battle of his life and needs our help to cover medical expenses and treatment costs. I looked up at him with innocent eyes. Seems accurate to me. You are facing a serious health crisis, your relationship with my ex-fiancé is definitely unhealthy, and you're fighting the battle of your life trying to figure out how to explain to all these donors why their money is going to a perfectly healthy person. This is fraud, Eddie. Is it? I'm not asking for money for myself. Every donation goes into an account specifically set up for Blaine Harrow's medical expenses. If he doesn't have any medical expenses, well, that's his problem to figure out. Blaine stepped closer to the fence, his polished facade starting to crack. You can't do this. Actually, I can, and I am. See, the thing about people like you and Sophie is that you think you're the only ones smart enough to run a con. But you forgot something important. What's that? I know how to build things, including websites, fundraising campaigns, and elaborate schemes to make cheating liars face the consequences of their actions. A work truck rumbled past us, loaded with steel beams for the next phase of construction. The driver honked and waved, and I waved back, keeping my expression friendly and relaxed. Here's what's going to happen, Blaine. You're going to walk back to your fancy car, drive away, and figure out how to explain to your parents why they flew back from Europe for nothing. You're going to help Sophie deal with all the well-meaning friends and family who want to visit you in the hospital, and you're going to think very carefully about whether you want to escalate this situation. Or what? I smiled, and this time it was genuinely pleasant. Or I'll show you what happens when someone who builds things for a living decides to tear something down instead. Blaine stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to decide if I was bluffing. I wasn't, and something in my expression must have convinced him of that. This isn't over, he said finally. No, it's not. But you started it when you decided to steal my fiancé. I'm just finishing it. He turned and walked back to his BMW, moving a little less confidently than when he'd arrived. I watched him drive away, then pulled out my phone and made a call. Mrs. Bowles, it's Eddie Carver. I was wondering if you'd noticed any unusual activity around the old apartment lately. Oh my, yes. That handsome man has been coming and going at all hours. Just yesterday I saw him carrying boxes up the stairs. And this morning, there was quite the argument on the front porch. Argument? Sophie and some other woman. Blonde, very well dressed. They were shouting about money and lies and all sorts of unpleasant things. Quite the spectacle. Elena, Sophie's best friend, was already turning on her as the lies started to unravel. Thank you, Mrs. Bowles. I appreciate you keeping an eye on things. Of course, dear. You know, I always thought Sophie wasn't good enough for you. Too much makeup, not enough substance. I hung up and turned to find Toby watching me with a mixture of admiration and concern. You're really going through with this, he said. They humiliated me, Toby. They made me look like a fool in front of everyone I care about. They stole money from our joint account to fund their affair, and they thought I was too stupid to figure it out. So you're going to destroy them. I'm going to let them destroy themselves. I'm just providing the stage. That afternoon, I got a call from Detective Ray Laird of the Millbrook Police Department. We'd worked together on a few projects over the years. The department had hired my company to build a new evidence storage facility, and Ray had been the liaison. Eddie, I need to ask you a few questions about a fraud complaint. What kind of fraud complaint? Someone reported a fake charity website using a local man's name and photo without permission. The complainant says you might have information about who set it up. I met Ray at Murphy's Tavern an hour later. He was a 20-year veteran of small-town policing, the kind of cop who'd rather solve problems than create paperwork. "So," he said, sliding into the booth across from me, "want to tell me about this cancer fund?" "What cancer fund?" Ray pulled out his phone and showed me the Cancer Care for Blaine website. "This one. Blaine Harrow says you created it to harass him." "Did he? That's interesting. What makes him think I'd do something like that?" "He says you're angry because he's dating your ex-fiancée." "I am angry about that, but I'm not sure why that would make me want to help him raise money for medical expenses." Ray studied my face carefully. "Eddie, I've known you for 5 years. You're not the type to run scams or commit fraud, but this whole situation smells funny." "How so?" "Well, for starters, Blaine Harrow came into the station wearing a $3,000 suit to complain about someone trying to give him money. That's not usually how fraud works." "Maybe he's just civic-minded." "Maybe, or maybe he's worried about something else." Ray leaned forward. "See, I did a little digging after he left. Turns out Mr. Harrow has some interesting financial problems. Lawsuit from a former business partner, liens on property, credit issues. The kind of problems that might make someone desperate enough to fake a serious illness for sympathy and financial support." I took a sip of my beer and waited. "Then there's your ex-fiancée, Sophie Carver, right? She works in PR, knows how to manipulate public opinion, probably has the skills to set up a convincing fundraising website." "That's an interesting theory." "It is. And here's what makes it really interesting. The website was created using an IP address that traces back to the apartment you used to share with her, the same apartment where she still has access." I felt a cold smile spread across my face. "So, you think Sophie created the website?" "I think someone created it from that location. Whether it was Sophie or you or someone else with access to the apartment. I can't say for sure." "But you have a theory." Ray finished his coffee and stood up. My theory is that this whole thing is going to sort itself out without any help from the police department. And my advice to you, as a friend, is to be very careful about how you handle your personal business." "I always am, Ray." "Good. Because if this escalates beyond internet drama and hurt feelings, I'll have to get involved officially, and nobody wants that." After Ray left, I sat in the bar for another hour, thinking about the conversation. He'd basically told me that he knew I was behind the website, but he wasn't going to do anything about it unless things got out of hand. That was fine with me. I had no intention of letting things get out of hand. I had much bigger plans than that. That evening, I drove past the apartment building and saw Blaine's BMW parked in my old spot. The lights were on in the third-floor windows, and I could see 2 silhouettes moving around inside. They were probably trying to figure out how to shut down the fundraising website without admitting that the whole cancer story was a lie. It was a delicate problem. They needed to stop the donations without revealing the fraud that had started the whole mess. But here's the thing about lies. They're like cracks in a foundation. Once they start spreading, they're almost impossible to stop. And I was just getting started with my demolition work. The beauty of a well-planned demolition is that you don't need explosives or wrecking balls. Sometimes all it takes is finding the right pressure point and applying steady force until the whole structure comes tumbling down. By the 4th week of my campaign, the pressure was starting to show. Sophie called me at 6 in the morning, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Eddie, we need to meet. Today." "Good morning to you too, Sophie. How's Blaine's treatment going?" "Stop it. Just stop. You know he's not sick." "I know you told me he was sick. I know you postponed our wedding to take care of him. I know you've been living with him for 3 weeks now. Beyond that, I don't know anything." "The website, Eddie. You have to shut down the website." I was sitting in my truck outside the construction site, watching my crew arrive for another day of honest work. The contrast between their straightforward lives and Sophie's web of lies wasn't lost on me. "What website?" "Don't play games with me. Cancer Care for Blaine. It's raised over $4,000 now, and people are starting to ask questions." "What kind of questions?" "They want to know which hospital he's being treated at. They want to visit him. Mrs. Henderson from my mother's book club is organizing a meal train. The local newspaper wants to do a human interest story about his brave battle." I almost laughed. The lies were multiplying faster than Sophie could contain them, each new fabrication requiring 2 more to support it. "Sounds like the community really cares about Blaine's health. He doesn't have cancer. Then maybe you should tell people that." "I can't just tell people that. Do you know what that would do to my reputation, my career?" "Should have thought about that before you made up the story." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Sophie spoke again, her voice had changed. Less panic, more calculation. "What do you want, Eddie?" "What do you mean?" "To make this stop. What do you want?" "I want you to face the consequences of your choices." "Money? Is that what this is about?" You can have the joint savings account, all of it. You already spent most of it on your romantic getaways with Blaine. Then what? The apartment? You can keep the apartment. I already have the apartment. My name's on the lease, remember? Then what do you want? I thought about that for a moment. What did I want? Money wouldn't undo the humiliation of being played for a fool. Getting the apartment back wouldn't erase the 2 years I'd wasted on someone who saw me as a convenient placeholder until something better came along. I want you to understand what it feels like to have your life turned upside down by someone you trusted. Eddie, I want you to know what it's like to have people you care about look at you with pity and disappointment. Please, and I want you to realize that actions have consequences, even for people who think they're too smart to get caught. I hung up and turned off the phone. Sophie could call back all she wanted, but I was done listening to her excuses and bargaining attempts. The next phase of my plan required a different kind of preparation. That afternoon, I drove to Portland and visited 3 different costume and theatrical supply shops. I bought a gray wig, some makeup to add wrinkles and age spots, and a set of clothes that would make me look like a retired businessman. Nothing too elaborate, just enough to change my appearance for a few hours. Then I drove to the offices of the Millbrook Gazette, our local weekly newspaper. The receptionist was a young woman named Jessica, who'd graduated from high school with my younger sister. She recognized me despite the disguise, but I'd been counting on that. Eddie, what's with the costume? Hey, Jess, I need a favor, and I need you to keep it quiet. What kind of favor? I pulled out an envelope containing a printed article and several photographs. I want to submit a story for the community interest section, but I need it to be anonymous. Jessica looked skeptical. What's the story about? Local charity fraud. Someone's been running a fake cancer fundraiser, and I have proof. Her eyes lit up. Small-town newspapers lived for stories like this. Local scandal with clear villains and victims. Can I see it? I handed her the envelope. Inside was a carefully researched article detailing the Cancer Care for Blaine website, complete with screenshots of the fundraising page, copies of the donation records, and photos of Blaine looking perfectly healthy at various social events around town. The headline read, Local Couple Exploits Community Generosity with Fake Cancer Fund. This is... wow, Jessica said, flipping through the pages. How did you get all this information? Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing justice done. But why the disguise? Why not put your name on it? Because I don't want this to look like a revenge story. I want people to focus on the facts, not on who's reporting them. Jessica studied the article more carefully, her journalism training kicking in. These are serious accusations. We'll need to verify everything before we can publish. Everything in there is verifiable. Phone numbers, website registration records, bank account information. It's all public record if you know where to look. And you know where to look because I used to be married to one of the people running the scam. Jessica's eyes widened. Sophie Carver, she's involved in this? Read the article. Draw your own conclusions. I left the newspaper office and drove home, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The story would run in the next edition, which came out every Thursday. That gave me 3 days to prepare for the fallout. Wednesday evening, I got a call from Toby. Boss, you need to see something. What is it? Meet me at Murphy's and bring your phone. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Toby in our usual booth, watching him scroll through his social media feeds. Look at this, he said, turning his phone toward me. It was a Facebook post from Elena, Sophie's former best friend. The post was long, detailed, and absolutely devastating. I feel I owe the community an apology. It began. For the past month, I've been helping to spread information about a fundraising campaign for Blaine Harrow's cancer treatment. I did this because my friend Sophie Carver asked me to, and I trusted her completely. The post went on to detail Elena's growing suspicions about the fundraiser, her attempts to visit Blaine in the hospital, and her eventual realization that the entire story was fabricated. I confronted Sophie about this yesterday, the post continued, and she admitted that Blaine is not sick. The fundraising campaign was created to provide cover for their affair while Sophie was still engaged to another man. I am horrified that I participated in deceiving our community, even unknowingly. The post had been shared 47 times and had over 200 comments, most of them expressing shock and outrage. Elena turned on them, Toby said. Smart move on her part, getting ahead of the story, positioning herself as another victim instead of an accomplice. Think it'll work? Probably. Elena's good at managing her image, almost as good as Sophie used to be. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk, tonight. Murphy's Tavern, 9 p.m. Come alone. B. I showed the message to Toby, who frowned. You're not actually going to meet him, are you? Why wouldn't I? Because he's desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. That's exactly why I'm going to meet him. I want to see how stupid he's willing to get. At 9 o'clock sharp, Blaine walked into Murphy's Tavern looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. He spotted me at the bar and walked over, moving with none of his usual confidence. Eddie. Blaine, you look terrible. We need to make a deal. What kind of deal? You shut down the website, stop the newspaper story, and make this whole thing go away. In exchange, Sophie and I disappear. We'll leave town, start over somewhere else. You'll never see us again. I took a sip of my beer and considered the offer. Interesting proposal, but I have a few questions. What questions? First, how do you know about the newspaper story? Blaine's face flushed. Jessica Martinez called Sophie this afternoon, asking for comment on some article about charity fraud. Jessica Martinez? You mean Jessica Rodriguez, the reporter? Whatever her name is. The point is, we know you're trying to destroy us publicly. And second, what makes you think I have any control over what gets published in the newspaper? Don't pretend you didn't submit the story. I'm not pretending anything. I'm just wondering why you think I can make it go away, even if I wanted to. Blaine leaned closer, and I could smell the desperation on him like cheap cologne. Because you started this whole thing. The website, the donations, the investigation. It all traces back to you. Does it? That's a serious accusation, Blaine. I hope you have proof. I don't need proof. I know it was you. Knowing and proving are two different things. Just ask Sophie. She knows you don't have cancer, but she's having a hard time proving that to all the people who donated money to help with your treatment. Blaine slammed his hand on the bar, hard enough to make the bartender look over with concern. This has gone far enough, Eddie. People are going to get hurt. People already got hurt. I got hurt when my fiancée cheated on me with her ex-boyfriend. The community got hurt when someone set up a fake charity to steal their money. The only question now is whether the people responsible are going to face consequences for their actions. What do you want? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. We get it. We made mistakes. We hurt you. But this has to stop before it goes too far. I finished my beer and stood up. You know what, Blaine? You're right. This does have to stop. But it's not going to stop because you ask nicely. It's going to stop when the truth comes out and justice is done. And then what? You get your revenge and move on with your life? Then I get to watch two people who thought they were smarter than everyone else learn what it feels like to be humiliated in public. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Blaine? Tomorrow's Thursday. You might want to pick up a copy of the Millbrook Gazette. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made you want to believe in fresh starts and second chances. Unfortunately for Sophie and Blaine, their chances had run out about 3 weeks ago. I was having coffee at Rosie's Diner when the Millbrook Gazette hit the stands at 7 a.m. Rosie herself brought me a copy, her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that only comes from witnessing a spectacular downfall. Eddie, honey, you need to see this. The story had made the front page, complete with a large photo of Blaine at a charity golf tournament looking perfectly healthy and a smaller inset photo of the Cancer Care for Blaine website. The headline was even better than what I'd written, Fake Cancer Fund Bilks Local Donors Out of Thousands. The article was thorough, professional, and absolutely damning. Jessica had done her homework, tracking down donors who'd contributed to the fund, verifying that Blaine had never been treated at any local hospitals, and even getting quotes from legitimate cancer charities about the harm caused by fraudulent fundraisers. The best part was a sidebar story about Sophie's role in the scheme, complete with screenshots of social media posts where she'd promoted the fake charity to her friends and coworkers. By 8 a.m., my phone was ringing nonstop. Friends, family members, former coworkers. Everyone wanted to know if I'd seen the story, if I was okay, if there was anything they could do to help. The most interesting call came from my ex-mother-in-law. Eddie, dear, I just read the most shocking article in the newspaper. Margaret Winters had never liked me. I wasn't good enough for her precious daughter, didn't have the right education or social connections, worked with my hands instead of my brain, but now her voice was warm with sympathy and what sounded like genuine regret. It's been a difficult few weeks, Mrs. Winters. I can't believe Sophie would do something like this, and with that awful Harrow boy, his parents are beside themselves. You know Blaine's parents? Oh yes, we've known the Harrows for years. They're good people, but their son has always been troubled. Financial problems, relationship issues, that sort of thing. They've been bailing him out for years. I didn't realize. They flew back from Europe last week because they thought he was on the verge of a serious health crisis. Can you imagine? They were even planning to donate their vacation home to cover his medical expenses. The irony was perfect. Blaine's parents had been ready to sacrifice their own financial security to help their son fight a disease he didn't have, while he was busy spending my money on romantic getaways with my fiancée. Mrs. Winters, I hope you know that I never wanted things to end this way. Of course you didn't, dear. You're a good man. Sophie never deserved you. It was the first time she'd ever said anything nice about me, and it only took her daughter committing charity fraud to get there. The second interesting call came from Detective Laird. Eddie, we need to talk. About what? About the newspaper article, and about a complaint I received this morning from Blaine Harrow. What kind of complaint? Harassment, stalking, criminal mischief. He's claiming you've been running a campaign to destroy his reputation. I met Ray at the police station an hour later. He led me to a small interview room that smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams. So, he said, settling into his chair, want to tell me your side of the story. My side of what story? The story where you create a fake charity website, submit an anonymous tip to the newspaper, and orchestrate a public humiliation campaign against your ex-fiancée and her new boyfriend. That's an interesting theory. Do you have any evidence to support it? Ray pulled out a file folder and opened it on the table between us. Inside were printouts of the Cancer Care for Blaine website, bank records showing the donation trail, and what looked like a technical report about IP addresses and website registration. The website was created from the apartment you used to share with Sophie Carver. The domain was registered using a credit card that traces back to you. The anonymous tip to the newspaper came from someone who had detailed inside knowledge of the situation. Sounds like you've done your homework. I have, and here's what I found. Technically, you haven't broken any laws. I raised an eyebrow. Technically? The website never explicitly claimed that Blaine had cancer. It talked about a health crisis and medical expenses, but it never specified what kind of health crisis or medical expenses. Legally speaking, that's not fraud. Interesting. The donations are being held in a legitimate escrow account set up specifically for Blaine Harrow's medical expenses. If he doesn't have any medical expenses, the money can be returned to the donors or donated to a real charity. Again, not fraud. So why am I here? Ray leaned back in his chair. Because while you haven't broken any laws, you have created a situation that's causing problems for a lot of people. The donors feel deceived. The newspaper is getting angry calls from people who think they were manipulated into running a false story. And Blaine Harrow is threatening to sue everyone involved. Let him sue. Discovery should be interesting. Eddie, I'm trying to help you here. Walk away now while you're ahead. Let this thing die down naturally. Or what? Or Blaine might do something stupid, and then I'll have to arrest someone for assault or worse. Is that a threat? It's a warning, from a friend. I stood up and shook Ray's hand. I appreciate the warning, and the legal advice. What legal advice? The part where you confirmed that I haven't actually broken any laws. Ray sighed. Eddie, be careful. This isn't a construction project where you can control every variable. People are unpredictable, especially when they are desperate. I'll keep that in mind. But as I walked out of the police station, I wasn't thinking about being careful. I was thinking about the next phase of my plan. That afternoon, I drove to the Millbrook Country Club, where Sophie's parents were members and where she'd probably retreated to wait out the storm. The club was the kind of place where old money went to pretend it was still relevant, all dark wood paneling and portraits of long-gone founders. I'd never been inside before. Construction workers weren't exactly welcome in places like this, but today I had a legitimate reason to be there. The club manager, a thin man named Patterson, who looked like he'd been born wearing a suit, met me in the lobby. Mr. Carver, I understand you wanted to speak with me about a donation. That's right. I'd like to make a contribution to the club's charity fund. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly. The club's charity fund was how wealthy members laundered their guilt about their privilege, making tax-deductible donations to causes that made them feel better about their lives. That's very generous. What amount were you considering? $4,327, the exact amount raised by the Cancer Care for Blaine website. Patterson's professional smile faltered. I'm sorry. I'm sure you've heard about the fake charity fund that's been in the news. The money needs to go somewhere legitimate, and I thought your club's charity fund would be appropriate. Mr. Carver, I'm not sure. The donation will be made in honor of Sophie Carver and Blaine Harrow, with a small plaque recognizing their contribution to the community's awareness of charity fraud. Patterson looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. He led me to a small office off the main lobby, closing the door behind us. "Mr. Carver, I think there may be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. I have a check for the full amount, and I'd like to present it at your next membership meeting. I assume Sophie's parents will be there." "Sir, I don't think that would be appropriate." "Why not? It's a legitimate charitable donation, properly documented with full transparency about where the money came from." Patterson sat down heavily behind his desk. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Carver?" "I want to make a donation to charity, in honor of two people who taught me valuable lessons about trust, honesty, and the consequences of lying to people you claim to care about." "And if we refuse the donation? Then I'll find another charity, maybe the local cancer society. I'm sure they'd be interested in the story behind the money." Patterson stared at me for a long moment, probably calculating the social and political implications of accepting or refusing the donation. "I'll need to discuss this with the board of directors." "Of course. You have my number." I left the country club feeling better than I had in weeks. The trap was closing, piece by piece, and Sophie and Blaine were running out of places to hide. That evening, I got a call from Toby. "Boss, you need to get down to the apartment building. There's some kind of situation going on." I drove to my old neighborhood to find two police cars parked outside the Victorian house, their red and blue lights painting the trees in alternating colors. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, and I could see Mrs. Bowles at her window, probably taking notes for her next gossip session. Detective Laird was standing on the front porch, talking to someone I couldn't see. When he spotted me, he walked over with the expression of a man who'd run out of patience. "Eddie, what did I tell you about being careful?" "What happened?" "Blaine Harrow happened. Apparently he came here tonight to confront Sophie about the newspaper article. The neighbors called in a domestic disturbance." "Is anyone hurt?" "No, but it was close. According to witnesses, Blaine was shouting about how this was all her fault, how she'd ruined his life with her lies. Sophie was screaming back that he was the one who wanted to fake the cancer story in the first place." "Sounds like they're turning on each other." "That's exactly what's happening. And when people turn on each other, they say things they shouldn't say, things that might interest a prosecutor." "Such as?" "Such as detailed confessions about conspiracy to commit fraud, recorded by helpful neighbors who were trying to document the disturbance for their own protection." Ray pulled out his phone and played a brief audio clip. Even through the tinny speaker, I could hear Sophie's voice clearly. "You're the one who said we should set up the website. You said Eddie was too stupid to figure it out." And Blaine's response, "I never said to use my real name and photo. That was your brilliant idea." "Sounds like they're both confessing to crimes," I said. "Sounds like they are, which means I'm going to have to investigate this officially now, instead of just giving friendly warnings." "That's unfortunate." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you got exactly what you wanted. They're destroying each other, confessing to fraud, and making my job a lot easier." "I didn't make them do anything, Ray. I just gave them enough rope. And they hanged themselves with it." "Something like that." Ray closed his phone and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You know, Eddie, when this whole thing started, I thought you were just another angry ex-boyfriend looking for revenge. But this is something else." "What is it?" "Justice. Messy, complicated, probably not entirely legal justice. But justice nonetheless." As I drove home that night, I realized Ray was right. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about consequences, accountability, and the simple principle that actions should have results. Sophie and Blaine had thought they were smart enough to manipulate everyone around them without facing any consequences. They'd been wrong, and I was just getting started showing them how wrong they'd been. The end came faster than I'd expected, and messier than I'd planned. Friday morning brought news that the district attorney's office was opening an official investigation into the Cancer Care for Blaine website. The newspaper article had attracted attention from state authorities who specialized in charity fraud, and Sophie and Blaine's recorded confessions had given prosecutors everything they needed to build a case. But before the legal system could grind into motion, the court of public opinion delivered its own verdict. I was at the construction site when Toby came running over with his phone in his hand, his face flushed with excitement. "Boss, you gotta see this. It's all over social media." He showed me a video that had been posted on Facebook an hour earlier. The footage was shaky and poorly lit, obviously shot through a window by someone trying not to be seen. But the audio was crystal clear. It was Sophie and Blaine, standing in the parking lot behind their apartment building, having what could charitably be called a discussion and more accurately be called a screaming match. "Told you this would happen." Sophie's voice was shrill with panic. "I told you Eddie wasn't as stupid as you thought." "You're the one who wanted to postpone the wedding," Blaine shot back. You're the one who came up with the cancer story. Because you said you needed time to get your finances in order. You said once we were married, you could access your trust fund. There is no trust fund. I've been broke for 2 years. My parents cut me off after the lawsuit. The video went on for another 3 minutes, with Sophie and Blaine systematically destroying each other's credibility while providing a detailed confession of their entire scheme. By the time it ended, they'd admitted to conspiracy, fraud, theft, and adultery, all while standing in a public parking lot where anyone could record them. How many people have seen this? I asked. It's been shared over 300 times in the last hour, and it's spreading fast. I pulled out my own phone and checked the local Facebook groups. The video was everywhere, along with hundreds of comments expressing shock, outrage, and a fair amount of schadenfreude. People were sharing their own stories about Sophie's lies, Blaine's financial problems, and the warning signs they'd noticed but ignored. The most damaging comments came from people who'd worked with them professionally. Sophie's co-workers at the PR firm were distancing themselves from her, while members of the charity boards Blaine served on were calling for his immediate resignation. "It's over," Toby said. "They're finished." "Not quite yet." That afternoon, I got a call from Patterson at the country club. "Mr. Carver, the board has decided to accept your donation. We'll be presenting it at tonight's membership meeting." "Tonight?" "Yes. We moved up the schedule due to current events. The members are quite concerned about the situation involving the Carver and Harrow families." "I understand. What time should I be there?" "Actually, sir, we'd prefer if you didn't attend. This is a private club matter." "But it's my donation." "Yes, but given the circumstances, we think it would be best if we handled the presentation internally." I smiled. Patterson was trying to control the narrative, to minimize the embarrassment to Sophie's family while still accepting the money. It was a reasonable strategy, but it wasn't going to work. "I'm afraid I can't agree to that, Mr. Patterson. If the club wants the donation, I need to be there to present it personally. Otherwise, I'll find another charity." There was a long pause. "Very well. The meeting begins at 7 p.m. The Millbrook Country Club's main dining room was packed that evening, filled with the kind of people who usually spent their Friday nights at wine tastings and gallery openings. But tonight, they were here for something much more entertaining, a public execution disguised as a charitable presentation. I arrived wearing my best suit, the one I'd bought for my wedding, and carrying a large ceremonial check made out to the club's charity fund. The amount was written in bold letters. 4327 $. Sophie's parents were sitting at a table near the front, looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past week. Margaret Winters caught my eye and gave me a small, sad smile that might have been an apology. Patterson introduced me with the kind of forced enthusiasm usually reserved for root canal procedures. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special presentation tonight from Mr. Eddie Carver, who has made a generous donation to our charity fund." I walked to the podium and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. These were people who thrived on gossip and scandal, who'd been following the Sophie and Blaine story with the same fascination they usually reserved for reality television. "Thank you for having me tonight," I began. "I'm here to present this donation in honor of 2 people who taught our community valuable lessons about trust, honesty, and the consequences of deception." A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone knew who I was talking about. Sophie Carver and Blaine Harrow showed us how easy it is to exploit people's generosity and compassion. They created a fake charity, lied to their friends and families, and betrayed the trust of everyone who cared about them. The murmur grew louder. Some people looked uncomfortable, but most seemed fascinated by the spectacle. But they also showed us something else. They showed us that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how cleverly you try to hide it. They showed us that actions have consequences, even for people who think they're too smart to get caught. I held up the ceremonial check. This money was donated by good people who thought they were helping someone fight cancer. Instead, they were funding an affair and covering up a lie. But their generosity wasn't wasted. It's going to help real charities do real good in our community. The applause was scattered and uncertain, like people weren't sure if they should be clapping for charity or scandal. I want to thank Sophie and Blaine for this lesson in accountability, and I want to assure everyone here that the full amount raised by their fake charity is being donated tonight, with complete transparency about where it came from. I handed the check to Patterson, who accepted it with the expression of a man handling a live snake. "Thank you again for this opportunity to turn something ugly into something positive." The applause was stronger this time, and I could see people pulling out their phones to record the moment. By tomorrow, the video would be all over social media, cementing Sophie and Blaine's reputation as the couple who'd tried to scam their own community. As I walked back to my seat, I spotted a familiar figure near the back of the room. Detective Laird was standing by the exit, wearing a suit instead of his usual uniform, watching the proceedings with professional interest. After the meeting ended, he approached me in the parking lot. "Interesting speech, Eddie." "I thought it went well." "Public, transparent, completely legal. You covered all your bases." "I try to be thorough." Ray lit a cigarette and took a long drag. "You know, I've been a cop for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of people try to get revenge on their ex-partners. Usually it involves property damage, harassment, sometimes violence. That's unfortunate. But this is something different. You didn't break any laws, didn't hurt anyone physically, didn't even lie about what happened. You just gave them enough rope to hang themselves." "People make their own choices, Ray." "They do, and Sophie and Blaine made some spectacularly bad ones. What happens now? Now they face the consequences. The DA's office is building a fraud case. The IRS is looking into their tax filings. The state attorney general's office is investigating their charity board memberships. And me? You? You get to go home and sleep well, knowing that justice was served." Ray dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his heel. "For what it's worth, Eddie, I think you handled this exactly right. You could have beaten the hell out of Blaine, trashed Sophie's car, made their lives miserable in a dozen illegal ways. Instead, you let them destroy themselves. They deserved the chance to do the right thing. And when they didn't take it, they deserved what happened next. I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but a sense of completion, like a job well done. The next morning brought a final surprise. I was having coffee on Toby's back porch when my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. "Eddie, it's Sophie." Her voice was small, defeated, nothing like the confident PR executive who'd been planning our wedding 2 months ago. "Sophie, I wanted to call before we leave town." "You're leaving?" "We have to. The lawyers say it's better if we're not here when the investigation gets serious. Blaine has family in California who might help us start over." "That's probably smart." "Eddie, I want you to know I'm sorry. For all of it. The lies, the cheating, the things I said about you. You didn't deserve any of that." "No, I didn't. I know you probably can't forgive me." "You're right, I can't. But maybe someday." "Sophie, there's no someday. There's no future where we're friends, or where I wish you well, or where any of this gets forgotten. You made your choices, and now you get to live with them." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I used to think you were simple," she said finally. "Uncomplicated. I thought that made you boring. And now? Now I think it made you dangerous. Simple people don't play games, Eddie. When you hurt them, they don't plot elaborate revenge schemes. They just react, honestly and directly. Is that what you think happened here?" "I think I underestimated you. We both did." "Yes, you did." "The man I'm talking to now, this isn't the Eddie I was engaged to. No, it's not. That Eddie trusted people. That Eddie believed in second chances and forgiveness and working things out like adults. What happened to him? You destroyed him, along with everything else." Another long silence. "I hope you find happiness, Eddie. Real happiness, with someone who deserves you." "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Sophie. But I hope you find it far away from here." I hung up and turned off the phone. Whatever Sophie and Blaine did next was no longer my concern. They'd made their choices, faced their consequences, and now they had to live with the results. The story made one final appearance in the Millbrook Gazette the following week, a brief article about the district attorney's decision not to pursue criminal charges due to insufficient evidence of intent to defraud. The money had been returned to donors, or donated to legitimate charities. No one had been financially harmed, and the perpetrators had left the state. But the social consequences were permanent. Sophie's reputation in PR was finished. No client would trust someone who'd been exposed as a liar and fraud. Blaine's charity board positions were gone, along with his social standing and family support. They'd gotten exactly what they'd given me: public humiliation, financial loss, and the destruction of their carefully constructed lives. The only difference was that they'd deserved it. I never saw or heard from either of them again. Sometimes I wondered if they'd found whatever they were looking for in California, if they'd learned anything from their spectacular downfall, if they ever thought about the construction worker they'd underestimated. But mostly, I didn't think about them at all. I had more important things to focus on, like building a new life on the solid foundation of hard-earned wisdom and the satisfaction of a job well done. The underdog had won, not through violence or illegal revenge, but through patience, planning, and the simple principle that actions should have consequences. It was the most satisfying construction project I'd ever completed.